This is Guided by Wellness with Dr. Magnus Thorsson, your source for clarity on the science of cannabis wellness.
You pick up a container of cannabis and see 22% THC. Seems simple enough, right? But here's the myth. Higher THC means stronger or better cannabis. The truth, though, THC is only one number in a much bigger story. Cannabinoids, terpenes, and testing results shape how cannabis actually feels and what it can do for wellness. In this episode of Guided by Wellness, I'm joined by a lead chemist from PureVita Labs, a Rhode Island state certified testing facility. Together, we'll break down how to read cannabis labels, COAs, certificates of analysis, in plain English, so you can help customers choose products with confidence, not confusion. Whether you're a budtender looking to guide smarter or a consumer trying to make sense of what's in the jar, this episode will help you see past the numbers and into the experience. Today's focus: why THC percentage doesn't predict how you will feel, the basics of reading a certificate of analysis, and what to know about cannabinoids like CBD, CBG, and CBC. And finally, we'll discuss why terpenes matter just as much as cannabinoids, how labs like PureVita ensure safety and accuracy, and an easy way to translate lab data for everyday customers. So, here today with us is Stuart Procter, chemist at PureVita Lab. He is going to help us unpack what is in the certificate of analysis. Welcome, Stuart. I appreciate you being on. I'd like to ask you first, if you can introduce yourself, tell us your educational background and your position with PureVita Labs.
Perfect, yes. First of all, regarding PureVita Labs, I'm a co-founder and laboratory director. In terms of Stuart Procter himself, I'm from England originally, and that's where I got my education. I have a bachelor's in applied chemistry and a PhD in a sort of multidiscipline science, biophysical analysis, analytical chemistry, and synthetic chemistry, all rolled into one. Obviously, a little bit different from analysing cannabis, you may say, but it's just the beginning of the path. From there, I went into actually field sales for a long time, but then marketing, chemistry development, working with some organisations like Metro and Shimadzu. Shimadzu is where I really encountered the cannabis industry. During my travels, I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly, and there's certainly an awful lot of ugly out there for sure when it comes to chemistry and how to perform chemical analysis. And honestly, I just felt that it's a growing industry. You need quality analytical chemists generating accurate data that's meaningful to the general public. The COA is just the start of it, but what goes into generating a COA, and it is a challenge. It is definitely one of the biggest struggles the industry still faces, is how to get accurate information to customers. Right now, I don't think the average customer sees a COA, and even if they did, would they understand what's on it is really the question.
Right, this is true. Now, when it came to cannabis, can you give me? You're from England. Cannabis is not legal in England.
No. I came across in 2007, working at the time at a company called Metro. I didn't really encounter much of the cannabis industry until I got to the USA, obviously. But yeah, it was in England right now. There's certainly medicinal benefits that could benefit many UK citizens, but we're still in a phase where you've got a lot of history and bureaucracy that steps in the way of science, unfortunately.
Right, exactly. And so more specifically, how did now I don't know this. Are you a user? How did you come to? What's your personal introduction to cannabis?
Generally, I don't smoke much. My usage is usually an edible type based product. If I'm going to smoke, I actually use low temperature vapes. It's one of those it's kind of what's the best way to consume, and I would, in my personal opinion, would say a low temperature vaporization device is ideal, because you get the full benefit of most of the compounds in what you're trying to smoke, and you miss out on all the carcinogens that you get if you use high temperature paralytic combustion techniques like traditional smoking. I have smoked, but not a lot, I'd say. I mean, I'm mostly my own personal usage is really for sleep aids. I use a combination of CBD, THC, and CBN edibles that help calm my brain to enable some sleep so I can get up and function and be a great analytical chemist.
That sounds like great use for cannabis. That's brilliant. Well, listen, I've asked you to come on to help us unpack the certificate of analysis, which, as you aptly pointed out, is a big stumbling block for people to understand cannabis. So let's roll right into it. What is, my first question to you as a chemist is, what is all the hoopla about THC? Why is it such a dominant metric in the market, and why is it perhaps misleading?
Well, I mean, a lot of this comes from just misunderstanding the actual product itself. Now, THC is certainly the most well-known cannabinoid. There are over 120 different cannabinoids, right? So I think the only one, if you went to anyone in the general public, would be what's in cannabis. They'd say THC. They probably wouldn't know any of the CBNs, CBDs, THCVs. All of those are just random letters that mean nothing to them. So just by generic understanding of cannabis, it's synonymous with THC. Then as the markets kind of try to balance or get a foothold and put some kind of valuation, it kind of grabbed hold of that. And honestly, a lot of the users too. So the more experienced the user you are, the higher your tolerance will be. So a lot of the more highly, the people who've been using cannabis for a long time will require slightly more potent products. And as those have been driving the market initially, it's been really that's what's been the major driving force. I mean, the kind of curious, the people that are potentially interested in the benefits, a lot of the products on the market right now really wouldn't be suitable for them as first-time users, which is definitely a problem. But it's escalated to the point now that, in Rhode Island, for example, if your product's not over 20% or even 22% now, because that marker keeps moving, creeping up surprisingly, your product has zero value in the market, which is utterly ridiculous, because there are huge benefits for a lot of the lower testing products that have a complex chemistry of terpenes, flavonoids, and cannabinoids that can have therapeutic benefits. Ironically, a lot of research has already been done that for the average user, anything over 17% is kind of wasted, because you saturate all your CB1 receptors, which is the predominant thing within the body that activates that psychotropic effect. So why is it that way? It's unfortunate, but I think, what's the word? Ignorance, I guess, I hate to use that word, but it's ignorance of the science. And part of that ignorance stems from the fact that it's been a Schedule 1 product, so you can't actually do any real science in the USA because it's considered legal. So it's frustrating for someone that's in the industry that sees a lot of the benefits of these products and what it can bring to people. But until we have a better solution, and that's something we are working on, I'm sure Jason, who is my partner and co-founder of Powerleaf, a sister company, has been really focusing on how to present data in a way that's palatable and understandable to the general public, that can start to draw attention away from Delta-9 THC and towards some of the real medicinal benefits that you can gain from cannabis products. Right.
And I mean, in the absence, precisely as you say, to summarize, in absence of other usable data, all that people have is THC based on legacy and based on market demand, because we're not telling them anything else. That's absolutely correct. That's brilliant, I should say. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to put a judgment on what you said. I agree with you. So can you explain?
More than welcome to put a judgment. I'm fine. I'm here. Let's judge.
Well, I mean, you bring up an excellent point that people are ignorant to the other benefits. I mean, this is precisely what we're trying to do with Canna Curious and with your metrics, is to try to introduce things like 8.5% THC with 10% CBD. Those products are moving really well, and people are coming back because they enjoy them. So there's got to be something. So I will ask you, can you explain the difference between THCA, Delta-9 THC, and total THC?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, total THC is dependent on which state you're in, because it's just a calculated made-up value that's used to put value on a product. So that's what total THC is. But let's start with THCA. So when the flower grows, you start off with CBGA, and then there are enzymes that can either convert that CBGA into CBDA or THCA. So they're what's known as the acid forms, and it's really the natural product that you find in flower. As it grows, you end up with the acid form of the product. So that will degrade with heat or just time, by the way. I mean, everything is subject to the laws of entropy and kinetics, but THCA will accelerate its degradation into THC under elevated temperatures. So when you smoke a product that's got THCA in it, you physically intake THCA, but you also intake the THC, and it's the THC that really gives you the psychotropic effects. You end up with the THC you get from THCA. You then add in the delta 9 THC, which will always be present, right? So now you have that plus the THCA, which you multiply by 0.877, gives you total THC. In Rhode Island, they also add delta 8 THC, which is actually a completely different molecule. Well, I say completely different. It's structurally very similar, but it is a different molecule and interacts with the body in a different manner. So, and this is also adds to the confusion, right? Because total THC in Rhode Island is different to total THC in Massachusetts, and it can be different to total THC in other states, because the definition isn't really a scientific one. It's kind of a made-up one that people are using to try and get information across to the public to say, yes, if you smoke this product, potentially you could have this much THC from this product, which is the psychotropic part of the molecule, of the combination of molecules that people focus on. So,
right. So the variance between THCA and THC is the multiplication factor. It's a reduction of about 12% down.
Right.
That is a way to calculate the number. Okay.
But then you'd add in the other bits too, right? So you absolutely have to add in delta 9 THC, because when I analyze a flower, I might see 2%. It's usually about, I might see 1% delta 9 THC and 29% THCA. I would then do the multiplication factor on the THCA to confirm that to delta 9, and then I would add in the delta 9 I actually saw. So it's the addition of components on the COA.
Okay. Well, now let me ask you this then. Hypothetically, if you had your way, how would you like budtenders to emphasize? What would you like them to emphasize instead of THC?
Well, I mean, so the common one that's utilized in the industry is sativa and indica, right? Which is unfortunate, because those aren't really a thing anymore. Because of the amount of crossbreeding and hybridization. There's literally everything you get today in a dispensary is a hybrid of some sort. I mean, the whole purpose of the system we were developing, the Power Leaf, was to give budtenders more information about the products. The problem is, if a budtender said, well, actually, this product's got a high amount of terpenylene and linalool in, for example, that wouldn't mean anything to the customer either, right? So it's the real challenge is, I don't think you're going to get to a point where most customers are going to understand the complexity of the molecules that are in cannabis. You just need to really get to a point where all that hard work's done on the back end, which is the whole point of the Power Leaf platform, that we translate what's called a chemotype, but not talking about phenotype. And that's the biggest problem, right? Right now, people are still talking about genetics, and whether those genetics are accurate for the products that are on the shelf or not is questionable. Let's just assume they are accurate. Genetics tell you what a plant can transcribe in its growing process. It doesn't tell you what it actually did, right? That's it. So that's the truth. So everything you see in every dispensary across the USA right now is based on genetics. Now, the genetics, if you have different lighting, different nutrients, different environments, different humidity, all of that can change the actual transcription or what is generated in that growth cycle. So the chemotype is the chemical fingerprint at the back end. In a perfect world, which is where we're trying to get to, would have a platform where all the data came in. The budtender could say, what are you looking for as an experience from this product? And then they could say, well, I would like to be able to relax, or I have trouble sleeping. And then the budtender could look through a list of products and say, well, actually, the chemotype for this product is similar, is the most likely product, or this family of products, because there would be a selection. Any one of these products should generally be that, or help you with that use type. By lack of information for such a long time, that your pot luck is, if you may find a good budtender that knows exactly what they're talking about, but even then the budtender is just looking at strain names, and they're trusting the whole process that came to that point of sale being true. And let's just say that you were having a difficulty selling a particular product, you could just change the name to a popular phenotype, and guess what? You could potentially move that product better through a dispensary. So there's no easy answer to that. So, I mean, in a perfect solution, the bud tender would have a device or a platform that would give them the ability to give better information, best suited for the use case that the customer is looking for.
So let me paraphrase the answer. So the chemovar is basically a list of what the plant has produced, and it's the best guide for what to expect in terms of experience if translated correctly.
Correct.
And PowerLeaf has set up a system that articulates what's in each chemovar, and the budtenders can search by the effect that people are looking for to land on the most likely chemovar to match that.
100%. That's exactly right. It's all about education to the public, because if the public's not aware of any of this, then you're never going to be able to move away from THC. So I actually work with the CAB, and part of what we're doing on the Cannabis Advisory Board is potentially looking at educational campaigns that we could potentially get out to the general public. It's not easy, because of course it's still a heavily regulated space. Getting the audience to understand and listen. There are many frustrated people I've met in a dispensary saying, I haven't got the product that I typically use because it's out of stock and I have no idea what to get. So it's a very common problem that even experienced users have, and it's just going to be a slow process. But yes, it's all through education and giving the customers the right tool to make better choices.
Right, and as you pointed out earlier, I just wanna bring up this point. It depends on light, it depends on water, it depends on all those conditions. So if you're familiar with a product, say Blue Dream, you bought Blue Dream, you come back, Blue Dream is going to be completely different. And this is part of the problem we're trying to solve with this podcast, is to give people the power to evaluate the products themselves based on the COA, so that they can make better determination.
I think one of the biggest challenges you'd face right now, by the way, is if you went to a dispensary in Rhode Island and said, could I see the COA for a product? The probability of you seeing that would be challenging. It's supposed to be something that happens easily, but I have certainly experienced myself saying, can I see a COA for a product? And, the bud tender doesn't really know how to get it. It's not easy to get to that information directly, even whilst you're in a dispensary. That is another challenge, because even if you can translate the COA, getting to it is not always the easy thing to achieve either. For example, you would ideally want to COA before you purchase the product, right? Because you want to see what's in it. Right now, the easiest way to get the COA is to get a barcode from a product you've purchased and scan it, and you're already committed to using it. So it's counterproductive in that respect. So yeah, it is not just a case of understanding the COA. It's actually getting the COA itself can be quite challenging too. Right,
and I do know that if some dispensaries do have it, as you said, on the product. You scan the QR code on the product after you've purchased it. Right. So by then it doesn't help you with your choices. That's absolutely true. Well, let me switch over to cannabinoids and terpenes. So the unsung heroes, as they say. What should budtender look for in the cannabinoid section of a lab report? What should they be looking for?
Again, this is a good question. So the common cannabinoids that you're typically, so obviously THCA, everybody knows about the THCA. The problem is that when you look at a COA now and you see all these minor cannabinoids, they're always going to be low because they're minor cannabinoids. So is 1% of CBG good or is it bad? Is that a high amount? Is it a low amount? So CBG, so THCV, for example, is another cannabinoid that's meant to help suppress appetite, for example. But if you wanted to buy a strain that had high amounts of THCV, you're not going to find one that's got more than 1 or 2%. Most of them have below 0.1 to 0.2%. So understanding that what's actually called a Z score, and you can look at the average of within a population of scores, is this a high score or a low score? And that's part of the visualization that we try to present on the PowerLeaf platform, so people can see that. But the biggest thing for me that really is difficult to find in the market now is CBD THC ratios, because if you go back in time, historically, before cannabis became widely cultivated, most products had a combination of CBD and THC in them because that's what's naturally occurring. But over time, the products have diverged because people have been trying to get rid of THC on one side and increase it on the other. So now you have hemp and marijuana, which are both cannabis, where essentially the cannabinoids in them are not really proportionate to what would typically be found in cannabis plants thousands of years ago. But the CBD is really important, certainly for regulating the THC. So all of the negative connotations that can derive from cannabis, like the psychosis, the paranoia, all of that really is way too much THC without any of the regulating cannabinoids that can help keep that in spec. So, for example, if you have CBD and THC in your bloodstream, the CBD will compete for the active sites on your CB1 receptors along with the THC. It will help regulate and keep that process much more manageable, so you don't have anxiety attacks. So the anxiety and all the negative connotations are usually from ridiculously high levels of delta-9 THC or THCA without anything to balance it out. So it's getting a balanced product is important. So yes, I mean, seeing lots of minor cannabinoids helps balance the product. One of the having a higher ratio of CBD to THC would be awesome. And there are products out there, but they're few and far between, because of course every time you try and put CBD into a product, you're sacrificing THCA because it all comes from CBG, right? But most budtenders aren't even going to know what minor cannabinoids are in a product. They're just not going to know that. They may know a couple of terpenes if they're very experienced budtenders, but very few would look at a COA and say, well, actually I happen to know that this particular strain has a high ratio of THCV to CBG, for example. It just wouldn't happen, right? That information needs to be presented via something like a platform like Powerleaf, but again, the education needs to come up front so people understand what they're looking for.
Right, and I mean, as you said, it's the cannabis plant has been coerced into producing THC because it has economic value. We've cleared it of CBD, which has a balancing value. I heard it explained to me, the difference between the two, very, very well. THC comes in and gets the party started, gets us jamming, gets us moving. And then CBD arrives to turn down the music a little bit and to slow the party so that we don't get the cops called on us.
Oh, no one goes crazy. So
right. Before, exactly. So, well, then, what terpenes should budtenders and customers primarily be looking for? And of course, it depends on what effect they're looking for. But can you talk us through a couple of terpenes?
Yeah, okay, because this is where the entourage effect is really important. So, for example, you could have a strain that's got transcaryophyllene, which is a common one, myrcene and linalool, and have a relaxing effect. But if you change the ratios and decrease the myrcene and increase transcaryophyllene, for example, it can move in the opposite direction. That's what Powerleaf has spent a lot. So when you look at the terpene profile on a plant, you see at least, I would say, 10 to 15 typically, and there would usually be 3 or 4 predominant terpenes, and those are the ones that usually have the larger impact. But again, there can be a balancing act within a terpene set where a terpene like myrcene, which is a bit more relaxing, right, could be counteracted by something like linalool or something else that's got other effects. So it's not easy to do. I mean, that's really the science of what we're trying to achieve. That's where all the research is required. So if you look at the pharmaceutical industry, which is obviously one of the competing industries, the reason why they or the reason they disliked cannabis was because you can deal with one molecule. That's what pharmaceutical products mostly are today. They are small molecules, one active ingredient. They add a bunch of stuff in to get that compound called drug delivery mechanisms to get it where they want it in the body. But it's a single active ingredient. That is not the case at all with cannabinoids or cannabis. There are so many combinations that it's not easy to translate, which is why we spent all this time developing a model to try and alleviate that problem, right? Because you could see something that's got myrcene and you think, oh, that's great, but you're unaware of another terpene in there that could be countering that effect. So it's not. We analyze 40 terpenes, and we generally see most of them at different levels in different products. So even if you saw that data on a COA, it would be very confusing to most people, even someone like myself who actually understands the chemistry. There is definitely guidance coming, and that's part of what we're trying to give people. I would definitely look at the better measure right now would be looking at the cannabinoid to terpene ratio, for example, as a generic.
Right.
as a generic thing, because obviously the higher the THC, you can start to drown out or negate a lot of the additional benefits from terpenes, right? Because your body's being dominated by the psychosis or what it is that you're getting from potential high THC products. So it's really I would look for a high terpene to cannabinoid ratio, and if I was looking at products, I would judge it more on the relative abundance of terpenes without something to translate what they are, is what I would say, because that's definitely a challenge.
What I'm hearing you say, it's like shopping for flowers, putting together your own bouquet. Each bouquet is going to be different. The terpenes are part of the bouquet, the cannabinoids are part of the bouquet, and each COA basically represents a bouquet of flowers that are going to have different effects, and it's the combination of
Correct.
cannabinoids and terpenes and the balance between the two that is going to be able to cultivate or culture the right experience.
Absolutely, and that's not easy to translate in the glance of an eye across a COA, for example. So that's. But you're 100% correct. It's the whole caboodle, so to speak. And honestly, this is why the public needs more education and help to understand this, and why platforms like PowerLeaf need to be out there in the public to give people the power of choice. Because right now you just don't have it. There is no power of choice. It's do I want a 25% or a 17%, right? That's the power of choice right now. And
right.
It's just not. First of all, it's isolating a lot of use in the market that could be benefiting a lot more people because they have no idea about the use cases.
Not only that, but I'm aware of two reports, one out of California and one out of Canada, that both articulate how dangerous the high levels of THC in long-term use are to the user, and we're not bringing that information to the consumer. Well, let me ask you this then: what cannabinoids or terpenes are undervalued or underrated in your opinion?
Well, the cannabinoids, THCV, I think, is another one that is starting to get a bit of the limelight. You are starting to see now products with THCV in. It can certainly help with appetite issues. I would say CBG is a good one for relaxing too. But I would say, CBD, for example, everyone knows about it right now, but no one really knows about it as a regulator with THC, right? Because that's a different kettle of fish. I mean, I would almost recommend to some people that can't find the product they want, I would say buy some CBD gummies, buy some flour, take your CBD gummy, then smoke your flour, right?
Right. Actually, you know, this is very interesting that you would say this, because Canna Curious is launching Common Clear, which is a CBD flour, which is intended for people who want to mix their Durban poison or whatever with put a little nugget of CBD flour in when you grind your regular flour, and it's going to balance and provide you with a better experience.
I would say CBD is known, but it's not known for its better effects, I would say. That would be, if I was to point to one and say that would be a great message you could get across into the industry, because, first of all, it might even start some cultivators to start generating these products, right? Because you can grow products that have CBD and THC in, no problem.
Right, but as you aptly pointed out earlier, like if it's under 17%, it doesn't hit the market. And, I've done extensive market research, and, it is hard to find flour that's less than 15% THC anywhere in Massachusetts or Rhode Island.
That's absolutely, it's insane.
And that is challenging. Yeah. So, well then, what red flags should customers be looking for when they look at a COA? Is there something that they should be aware of?
I mean, so for me personally, I always look at the heavy metals that are in, because I mean, even a passing COA can have heavy metals in, because there are limits that are in there. But it's one of the things that always concerns me is that people get confused about this too. I've had many people say to me, "Well, look, you've got low levels for your flour for lead and cadmium," and they say, "But you can get more on an apple." And I says, "Well, yeah, because people don't smoke apples, right? When you eat metals, they go straight through you. They're hydrophilic. They pass out in your urine most of the time. But when you smoke a product, it goes straight into your bloodstream, into your brain. And that's where they live forever. So a lot of the long-term problems I think we see from people using their own homegrown product for long periods of time is that later in life they may have mental issues, or we have seen increases in lead, and there's a lot of research now going into, and once lead's in the brain, it ain't coming out, right? So it's a long-term. I would personally look for, and there are a lot of products out there that have zero lead in and cadmium. Those are the ones that I would choose personally. In terms of products, I would look for something that's lower THC and higher CBD if it's available, but that's very rare. So for me personally, if I was to buy a product, I would be looking for something between the 15 to 20% range and a good terpene profile, or at least a high terpene to cannabinoid ratio. So if I'm seeing 17 or 18% THCA, but I've got a 2 to 3% terpene profile, that's a good healthy ratio that would be something I would look for on a product. I try and stay away from, if I'm looking at a COA and I've got like even some of these concentrates, which is an interesting market. I mean, these are 18, 90% plus, but then you end up with, to get to that, you have to distill off all of your terpenes. You can add them back in again. But if I'm looking at a distillate, for example, I would usually gear myself to something that had like 5% plus of terpenes to help counterbalance the 80 and 90% delta-9 THC that's in the product. So right. From my point of view, from a health point of view, I don't like to see heavy metals at all in products, because I think it's the long-term damage is unknown, and guess what? You're not going to know about it for 20, 30 years.
Right. So it's going to creep up on you. Well, then thank you for that. Now let me switch topics to how do you ensure safety and accuracies now that we've talked about heavy metals. So the COA confirms both potency and product safety, but how does PureVita ensure consistency of those results?
Well, you've struck on a very important topic, by the way, and this is not just a PureVita problem or a Rhode Island problem. This is a national or even international problem of how do you know that what's on the COA is anything close to representative of what you buy on the store? I mean, you can be as qualified and process an analytical facility the best in the world, but if what actually arrives on your doorstep to analyze isn't representative of what gets to the customer, all the data is meaningless, and that's a huge challenge. So in Rhode Island, for example, we sample products, which is really important. And if you go to other states, for example, you could have in Massachusetts, right? I think that may have changed, but it's certainly up until recently, they would send the cultivator that grows a product would send a product to be tested. How do we know that this 1 gram or 10 grams they've sent that customers come from this 100 pounds of flour that it's representing? And flour being heterogeneous is really tricky. You have to randomly select a number of buds, right? And then how the cultivator stratifies their crop, and they may not even stratify. And what I mean by that is, do they group top buds with middle buds and bottom buds, or do they just take the whole plant and mix it together? So there's a huge amount of variability that can happen before the sample gets to the lab. I mean, that's one of the hardest parts of regulating this industry and getting information to consumers, is physically sampling a product that's going to be representative of what they smoke. That's challenge number one. I mean, in Rhode Island, we have their labs themselves do the sample collection, which is definitely an improvement. I would argue you could go one step further and have a completely independent body do the sample collection, because guess what? A lab may want to introduce a bias, because guess what? People are judging my data, not on its accuracy, but on how well it can help them sell their product. So that's a different dynamic. That's a whole different topic that we could spend hours discussing. But anyway, there are solutions to that problem as well. But that's step one, is getting a representative sample. So what we do here, to ensure that our processes, we have a number of things. So first of all, we use internal standards, which help track our process. So when I get a flour, for example, I have to homogenize it, which means just mash it into a powder. I subsample it, which means I'm taking a small amount of the stuff that I've already done to say, this is now representative of this entire 13 grams. I then had to perform an extraction process in an efficient manner. So what do? First of all, we use two different standards, because all of our So I use something called second source standards, which basically means I have any measurement that's done in cannabis is we're comparing to something. So I say, right, this compound is 100%. Therefore, if I weigh this much out, I know that I have 80% because it has the same response.
Right.
Anyway, so the problem is, how do I know my standard's right? So if my standard's wrong, then all the data I have after that is wrong. So I use something called a second source standard to verify the standard. So it's a process. Anyone or any one of my staff can actually come in and do it if someone's on vacation, for example. So again, there's all these, there's no easy answer other than the fact lots of very small steps that we implement that form the whole to give you the right result. But at the end of the day, if the sample that turns up at the lab is wrong, the answer I get is wrong, regardless of what I do to it. So it's you need the process from the harvest, the batching, the sampling, all the way through to the testing. All of that has to be on the money in order to get accurate data at the back end. I mean, so it's there are measures you put in place as an analytical chemist that can track and minimize errors, but again, we still have to trust the whole system. The whole process has to work to get the right result. And right now, in this industry, there are a lot of biases, right? You can put a bias on a result. And there's definitely things I could do within the regulations that could potentially bias a result to get me a higher number, for example. There needs to be oversight and regulation from the state. They are doing that, but there's not a lot of, still more that needs to be done, I would say. So you need to be able to trust the result from every lab. Right now, it's a little bit open-ended. You've got to have trust in the product at the moment, and it should be the other way around. You should be trusting the lab, and that's something that we're trying to fix in the long term. I kind of went off to answer the question, by the way. There was a lot.
You did answer the question of how the standard is upheld. How do you ensure consistency in its result? You shared with us that you have an internal standard that you've developed, that you adhere to. You use robotics. It brings up a story in my mind from from early Guinness days when they developed their internal standard, which is now a standard worldwide, the t-test, the standard t-test. You know that story.
Absolutely, yeah, the variance, absolutely. Two-tail t-test and t-test and how many standard deviations away from the mean. Great statistics.
Right. I mean, anyone who takes, basic statistics has learned that student t-test. Which, do you know the story behind the student t-test?
I don't know.
So the brewer at Guinness who developed the t-test, he was not allowed to submit it because he was studying for his PhD or studying. So he anonymously submitted it as student t-test. And that's why we know it today as a student t-test, as opposed to the brewer whose name I have no idea what it was. But anyway, we can find that up in math books. No, that was a brilliant answer. Thank you. Yeah, high internal standard. The conflict between the different metric labs in terms of being popularity contest is well established and detrimental to the customer, because the customer's not going to have assurance that what they're buying is exactly what they're buying. So I think you've explained to us the challenges of cannabis testing. What role do you see for the COA in consumer education? How do we use the COA?
I think the best use of the COA is to have something translate it for you. Is the best way I would say it. I mean, it's. I would look at it for now. From my point of view, I would say first of all, you should definitely look at things like the heavy metals. You should look at for the pesticide panels and see if there's anything in there that's obvious strikes you that something you don't want. For me, it's always lead. I always look for that. That's just me. I would say, if, for example, when you look at there's numbers, there's things like not many people know what an LOQ or an LOD is, for example. So when you look at a COA, you will see a bunch of numbers, and some of them, besides something like lead, it might just say below LOQ. So what does that actually mean? So what that means is, it means that, yes, I detected some, but it was low to the point that I couldn't accurately measure it and give you a good number, which is what the limit of quantification is, right? So there are many ways to define that, but those are two things that when you look at a COA, you should be aware of. So if it says ND is usually none detected, and that doesn't mean it's not there, by the way. It just means the method that was used wasn't sensitive enough to detect it. There could be nothing there, but never just assume because it says ND, it's not there. It just means the analytical method that was used at that time couldn't detect it. Then below, then you've got what's called, so that's the limit of detection. If it's below the limit of detection, it's an ND. If you detect it, but it's below the level of quantification,
that makes
when
perfect
people
sense.
see this, it can be confusing. And honestly, it's going to be tough for the average consumer to really understand everything on the COA. I just think it's a huge challenge. It should be readily available. It should be readily available before you buy a product. Tools like PowerLeaf, for example, will be awesome for helping you with what the product does. But on the PowerLeaf right now, there's no toxicological information on contaminants that we're seeing. So there is, I'm saying maybe that needs to be addressed too. It's that. But the actual COAs themselves, it's for looking for the cannabinoids. Sure, you can see which ones are there. I would say I would generally use a COA just to look at the contaminants at the moment, because and see if there's any contaminants in there. When you look at or trying to translate terpenes and cannabinoid profiles, it's going to be really challenging. You're going to have such a high level of education for the end consumer to understand it, that the PowerLeaf does that job for you, right? That just takes that away. So it's important that everyone has an understanding of what themselves as well, and how they want to try and relate that information to what they're consuming.
Right, and one of the things that I'm trying to emphasize is that people do some note taking when they're trying a product. Take some notes. Take notes not only of the product, but what did you eat? How did you sleep? How was your day? Write those things. How do you feel before you take the product? Then let's talk about what impact the product had on you and how do you feel afterwards. I mean, that's I think the pathway we want to get to. But
100%. So if part of what we're trying to achieve with the PowerLeaf platform is that people would have their own digital wallets and they can track this information, and then ultimately that will be able to recommend another product that's similar. But you're 100% correct. Everyone needs to monitor their own usage and understand themselves better, because if they can trust the COA and they can trust the information they're receiving, they can make better informed decisions about the products they want. Right? So it's right. Or is it just a crapshoot, which we have right now, like potluck? You just go in and hope.
It's interesting to hear from a chemist. It's a crapshoot, but it is absolutely true. We do meet the requirements. You talk through the sampling. Really, I admire that. Independent sampling would be great. If we could get an independent third party come in and take samples the same way in the grow rooms all the time, we would have a better field of information.
Sure.
But then let's talk about that then. How do we make labels work for real people? You have the PowerLeaf, we have the experience framework that we're experimenting with at Kinda Curious, both trying to meet the consumer sort of in the middle. So, what does the ideal label look like? If we say, you have PowerLeaf that's a supplemental information. I have the experience framework that's supplemental information. What would the required label, the ideal required label, what would it look like?
Well, this is the real challenge. It's the ideal label has accurate information on it. That's the biggest challenge right now. I would say that most labels you see on a product is fanciful.
Right.
So making sure that what's on the label is what's actually in the product would be the most amazing thing. And that requires a QA program for the state to implement off-shelf testing, so on and so forth. So the actual what goes on it is less critical over the fact whatever goes on it needs to be right. That's the most important thing. But for example, let's talk about what I should put out. THC, should that be on a label? Sure, I think that is an important thing to have, because it right now it's what everyone's used as a metric. Should it be THCA or should it be THC? Should you have total THC? I think there's a lot of confusion about all of these terms. As a scientist, I'm a purist. I'd like it to have the individual numbers for each cannabinoid, but I would understand that. Would the average consumer understand that? And how do you compare what you see in Massachusetts to what you see in Rhode Island and what you see? It's more important that the standards formed across the entire USA and people just stick to it. And then once you've got these metrics in place, people can start to understand them a bit better. But right now, every state's different. Is what's tested, has it been inflated? I mean, I did a study recently with A2LA, and what was on the COA, we had 10 labs tested, and all 10 labs got something completely different from what was on the original COA. Whatever was on the label was completely useless at that point, because it was just numbers that didn't mean anything. So that's the biggest challenge. That's the perfect, at least, I would say, THCA, CBDA, CBD, and THC, 4 cannabinoids that are the most major cannabinoids, should we say. If you just had those 4 things on for cannabinoids, that'd be great. But then do you want to put terpenes on too? But now you have a little bit of space on the label. Should you put the top 3 terpenes on? Or it's so tough. This is probably even wilder than cannabinoid analysis, just because of the way there's so much variation in the way you can generate terpene data. So without getting too technical, there's just something called a headspace injection versus a liquid injection. Those 2 methods will give you different numbers based on how you prepared the sample. So it's the perfect label is accurate.
Okay, so and everything else is a crapshoot.
Everything else is a crapshoot. I would say once the standard, if there was a standard,
yeah,
that'd be great. It's like a food label, right? When you pick up a food label, you've got protein, carbohydrates, vitamins. It's a standard. Every label you look at in a supermarket is pretty standard.
Actually, this is a very interesting topic that you bring up. You know, if you look at in Europe, it's always based on 100 grams. Every food label is always based on 100 gram of whatever the ingredient is, so that you can, as a consumer, read it in percentages as well.
Absolutely.
In America, it's by the serving. And it's confusing. So we actually do a pretty crappy job of informing consumers, because we've trained people to read food labels that are inconsistent. So they should be served cannabis labels that are inconsistent. It stands to reason. I agree with you. It should be standardized. It should be accurate. Having the same across all would be beneficial, because this is one of the things that we talk about here, is that the advice that's being given is so inconsistent.
Absolutely.
So at best, inconsistent at best. But what I'm drawing from this conversation is that the way to better security or better secure the right results is to educate consumers on how to read it. And that's really what you can do.
Absolutely. That's certainly the biggest challenge we face right now, is educating consumers and the public, because, and this is the real truth, we're still on the cutting edge of science, right? We still don't 100% know a lot of what we say we know, because we're still collecting data. And that's part of the challenge. We're in a new industry. That's a beautiful thing, and at the same time, it's like, yeah, we don't know what we don't know. But yes, we always try and serve the best available information. And right now, there is the best available information isn't getting to the public. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. And you bring up another very interesting point. I mean, cannabis is a new innovation. Cannabis has been around for millions of years. But as a consumer product, it has changed so drastically in the last decade that no matter how long you've been using cannabis, what we have today is so changed that it's a new innovation.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of challenges, and I guess that makes it exciting as well. I mean, it's certainly an exciting time, but a lot of these it'd be nice if the next generation will appreciate our work, right? That's how it is.
Yes, that's very good. I wholeheartedly applaud that. Well, listen, so thank you for that. I think we've sort of gotten the juice out of that. But there's something I do is I bring up a myth, then I want to dispel the myth, or I want to prove the science behind it. And one of the myths that I want to talk about is, the myth is that higher THC always means stronger effects.
So this is really a combination of how the body works, right? The THC really just stimulates your CB1 receptor, and that's part of your system. But terpenes stimulate an awful lot more with a larger entourage of other chemicals. So, and it's the combination of effects can be way more powerful than just the saturation of your CB1 receptors, for example. It's a huge myth, and 90% of people that really know cannabis and used it are already aware that, it's not all about the potency. If you speak to anyone it's there, and it does have an impact for sure, but you can have a much larger impact from a lower THC with a larger entourage of other effects. So if you had a distillate that was just Delta 9 THC and you smoked that, I've never done that, so I couldn't comment, but I know people that have told me that it just doesn't taste good. It's just not a pleasant experience if it's just D9 THC, but it's all the other entourage effects that really give cannabis its nuances and its true power and its ability to help people that need it, for people who need to sleep, people who need pain relief, people who have inflammatory joint issues. So it's definitely a myth, but it's difficult for me to quantify. I'm a doctor, but I'm a chemist doctor, not a proper doctor. So
But you nailed it. You nailed it. I mean, it depends on the entire chemical profile of the chemoir, as you said. I mean, I just gave a sample to someone who's been smoking for 40 years. I gave him a product that's 9% THC and 10% CBD with a beautiful bouquet of terpenes. The report that came back from this seasoned veteran of using cannabis was, this was a fabulous experience, he said. Fabulous experience. And it was not about, the high. I mean, you can get 45% THC infused pre-rolls that are not going to give you a good experience. So
I would agree, but
absolutely, yeah. So the science is so that myth is busted, we can say.
Absolutely. I would say a biologist or a doctor, a proper doctor as opposed to a chemist doctor, could give you a better busting than I could, but that's as good as I can bust it for you.
Yeah, I know. We're half-ass doctors to bust things, Anyway, listen, I wanna thank you so much for taking the time to answer my questions and help my listeners understand the certificate of analysis better. Thank you so much, Stuart. I really appreciate it.
No problem. I'm always happy to help where I can.
And now for a brief science insight. THCA converts to THC when heated, but cannabinoids like CBD and CBG modulate how THC feel, while terpenes like myrcene or limonene influence mood and body effects. The synergy between them, the entourage effect, explains why balanced products often feel better than the highest number on the shelf. Reading the COA doesn't require a lab coat. When you understand the bigger picture beyond THC, you can translate data into trust. And trust is what keeps customers coming back, not just for products, but for guidance. Thanks for joining me on Guided by Wellness. Labels and COA aren't just fine print, they're tools to help match the right products to the right person. Next time, we'll explore dosing strategies, how to help customers start low, go slow, and stay in control. Got a COA you would like explained? Send it to us. We may feature it in a future episode. And if you found creative way to explain lab results in a simple term, share them with us. Your insight should help the whole community. Until then, stay curious and keep guiding with wellness in mind.
Thanks for watching Guided by Wellness. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.